Daniel sat at the polished oak dining table, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off the crystal wine glasses. He watched Laura laugh at a joke he barely remembered telling. The sound melodic, yet somehow hollow in the quiet apartment. Their home, meticulously decorated in muted tones, exuded warmth and stability. But beneath the calm surface, something in Daniel's chest twisted uncomfortably. He had always thought of himself as rational, level-headed, yet lately, a persistent unease had begun to grow. A quiet whisper that something in Laura's eyes didn't quite match the words she spoke. Laura, 30, with dark chestnut hair cascading past her shoulders, lifted her glass and caught his gaze. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, her voice soft but probing. "Something on your mind?" Daniel forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just thinking about work. Numbers, deadlines, boring stuff." He took a sip of red wine, feeling the familiar burn slide down his throat. The illusion of normalcy had become both comforting and terrifying. As they ate, Daniel's mind wandered to small inconsistencies, late-night phone calls, abrupt changes in mood, a hesitation in touch that he had dismissed as fatigue or stress. He wanted to trust Laura completely. After all, she had been his partner for 4 years. But the gnawing suspicion refused to be ignored. Laura leaned back, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Remember our first trip to the lake?" she asked, smiling. Daniel felt a pang of nostalgia, the memory sweet but tinged with the faintest unease. They had been so happy then, so innocent, so unburdened by secrets. "I do," Daniel said, his voice softer. "You were terrified of the boat, and I couldn't stop laughing." A laugh escaped him, but it was hollow, tinged with something he could not name. Laura's eyes held a flicker of something too quick to interpret, a hesitation he almost didn't notice. After dinner, they moved to the living room. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across Laura's delicate features. Daniel sat close, resting an arm across the back of the sofa. "I love this," he murmured. "Just us like this." Laura leaned against him, her warmth soothing yet somehow distant. "I love this too," she whispered, though her tone carried a hint of something Daniel could not define, a whisper of worry, or maybe guilt. He brushed it aside, unwilling to probe too deeply, fearing what he might find. The evening wore on with quiet conversation, small laughter, and fleeting touches, each moment layered with a subtle tension neither of them acknowledged. Daniel noticed the way Laura's hands trembled ever so slightly when she reached for the wine bottle, the slight rigidity in her posture that seemed out of place in such intimacy. He chalked it up to nerves, though a part of him knew it was more. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Laura's gaze drifted toward the calendar on the wall. She swallowed and hesitated. "Daniel, there's an appointment next week. I'd like you to come with me," she said, her voice unusually tense. Daniel raised an eyebrow, curiosity mingling with concern. "An appointment?" he asked, trying to mask the sudden tightness in his chest. Laura nodded, avoiding his gaze. "It's medical. I just want you there. It's important." Daniel hesitated, sensing an invisible line being drawn between them, a shadow of something hidden. Yet he nodded, trusting her, even as the unease curled deeper in his gut. Little did he know, the simple act of agreeing to accompany her would be the first step into a world he could never have imagined. A world with a perfect marriage was merely a fragile mask, soon to be shattered. The morning sun cast a pale light through the blinds, slicing thin lines across the living room floor. Daniel adjusted his tie for the third time, tension knotting his shoulders as he waited for Laura. The apartment felt unusually quiet, the soft ticking of the clock amplifying every sound. When Laura emerged from the bedroom, dressed in a simple blouse and skirt, her expression was calm, but contained an edge he couldn't quite read. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady, though her hands lingered a moment too long on the strap of her purse. Daniel nodded, swallowing the tight lump in his throat. "Yeah, let's go." The drive to the clinic was suffused with silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the engine and Laura's shallow breathing. Daniel's mind replayed the previous night's conversation, circling back to the unease that had lodged itself deep within him. Something about this appointment felt different, though he couldn't put a finger on it. He told himself it was just nerves, hers or his. But the pit in his stomach refused to dissipate. The clinic was bright, sterile, and smelled faintly of antiseptic. Daniel followed Laura through the sliding glass doors, the echo of their footsteps muffled by the polished floors. Nurses and patients moved around them in a quiet rhythm, exchanging polite smiles and nods. Laura's grip on his arm was firm, almost desperate, as if she needed a tether to reality, or perhaps to him. "Please sit here," a nurse instructed, leading them to a small waiting area. The room was decorated in muted pastels, attempting to soothe, but Daniel felt only the cold hum of tension. He watched Laura fidget with the hem of her sleeve, the nervous energy in her eyes barely concealed. "You okay?" he asked, lowering his voice. Laura forced a small smile. "I'm fine. Just a little nervous, that's all." Her hand brushed his briefly, then retreated, leaving a lingering sense of fragility. Minutes stretched into an eternity before the nurse called Laura's name. Daniel followed, his steps hesitant. The office itself was compact, walls lined with certificates and anatomical charts. A faint smell of disinfectant clung to the air, and the soft tick of a wall clock seemed unnaturally loud. "Have a seat," the gynecologist said, gesturing to a vinyl examination chair. His tone was professional, but Daniel noticed the subtle curiosity in his eyes as he glanced at Laura. Daniel's chest tightened. There was something in the way the doctor studied Laura, something that made him shift instinctively closer. Laura perched on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It's routine," she murmured, but Daniel sensed the undercurrent of tension in her voice. She avoided eye contact, her lips pressed thin, a flicker of worry crossing her face every time the doctor's gaze lingered. Daniel's mind raced with questions he couldn't articulate. Why the insistence on him coming? Why the unspoken anxiety? The answers hovered just out of reach, like shadows moving behind a curtain. He wanted to speak, to demand the truth, but a part of him feared what he might uncover. The gynecologist spoke, gentle yet precise, outlining what the checkup would entail. Laura nodded, eyes focused on the sterile ceiling tiles, her foot tapping lightly against the floor. Daniel noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands as she reached for a tissue. When the doctor stepped out briefly, Daniel leaned closer. "Laura, what is this about?" he whispered, searching her face for some clue, some reassurance. She looked at him, eyes wide, a flash of panic crossing her features. "Daniel, just trust me, please," she said, her voice trembling, betraying the calm she tried to maintain. Daniel nodded slowly, though unease gnawed at him like a persistent shadow. Something was not right. The quiet fear in Laura's eyes was more telling than any words. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for what he sensed was coming, though he had no idea just how life-altering this routine checkup would become. The door clicked shut behind the gynecologist, leaving Daniel alone with his wife and a room full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. The gynecologist returned, carrying a clipboard and a carefully neutral expression. Daniel sat stiffly, hands clenched between his knees, while Laura's fingers twisted the edge of her blouse. The sterile room felt smaller, the walls pressing in, as if they were conspiring to trap him in this moment. He noticed a flicker of hesitation in Laura's eyes, a shadow that hadn't been there before. "Laura," the doctor began, his voice soft but deliberate. "There's something important we need to discuss before we proceed with the exam." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Important? What do you mean?" His voice was tight, almost shaking, betraying a mix of concern and rising panic. Laura's hand shot up, pressing against his arm, but it did little to soothe the jolt of fear racing through him. Laura exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. "Daniel, just let him speak." The doctor hesitated, then looked directly at Daniel, eyes calm but unyielding. "I need to tell you something about Laura's medical history. She was assigned male at birth." Time seemed to fracture. Daniel's mind froze mid-thought. A scream lodged somewhere deep in his chest. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, echoing in the sterile room. His pulse thundered in his ears. He blinked, trying to reconcile the person sitting beside him with this revelation, this secret that had been buried in plain sight. Assigned male, he repeated, his voice barely audible. The syllables tasted foreign, like a bitter poison sliding down his throat. Laura's eyes glistened with unshed tears, a mixture of fear and shame. She nodded, unable to speak. Daniel stumbled backward, chair scraping against the tile, his chest tightening. Why didn't you tell me? His words were jagged, raw, filled with disbelief and betrayal. Every memory of shared laughter, quiet evenings, and whispered promises now felt like a lie. Laura swallowed, her hands trembling. I wanted to so badly, Daniel. I wanted to tell you, but I was scared. I've been scared my whole life. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose us. Daniel's vision blurred. Part of him wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers that might never be enough. Another part, a smaller, quieter part, wanted to understand, to reach through the wall of deception and find the woman he thought he knew. Do you even love me? He asked, voice breaking, almost pleading. Laura's lips quivered, but her eyes were steady. I do. I've always loved you. Her confession hung in the air, fragile, trembling, but genuine. For a long moment, silence consumed the room. Daniel's mind spun in circles, dissecting every smile, every touch, every word of their past. Betrayal clashed violently with love. Fear wrestled with loyalty, and confusion clouded the air between them. He wanted to hate her, wanted to run, wanted to destroy the life they had built. But he also couldn't, not entirely. The gynecologist shifted uncomfortably. I understand this is a lot. I suggest we take a moment to process. This is sensitive, and it's natural to feel overwhelmed. Daniel's hands shook as he gripped the edge of the examination chair. I need air, he muttered, rising abruptly. Laura tried to follow, but he held up a hand, stepping toward the door. Each step echoed through the sterile office, heavy with the weight of a truth he couldn't yet comprehend. Outside, the hallway stretched long and bright, a stark contrast to the storm raging in his chest. Daniel pressed his palms against the cool wall, trying to steady himself. His mind replayed Laura's voice, her touch, her entire being. Everything he thought he knew now a fragile, uncertain construct. Laura's quiet voice reached him from behind. Daniel, please don't leave me. Not like this. He turned, eyes wild, searching for some anchor, some reassurance. But all he found was fear reflected in hers, a mirror of the same chaos consuming him. He wanted to understand, but the path forward was unclear. And in that moment, Daniel realized that nothing would ever be the same. The world he had built on trust and love had fractured, and the delicate balance of his mind teetered on the edge of something darker. What had begun as a routine checkup had become the catalyst for obsession, suspicion, and a descent that neither of them could have predicted. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and there was no turning back. Daniel walked the streets alone that night, the city's lights casting fractured shadows across the wet pavement. Every face he passed seemed to blur, each laugh and movement twisting into echoes of Laura's secret. He could not stop thinking about the revelation in the sterile gynecologist's office, the words repeating in his mind like a jagged recording. Assigned male at birth. The world he had trusted, the life he had believed in, felt like a fragile lie, shattering under his feet. His apartment felt empty when he returned. Laura was in the bedroom, quiet, the soft click of her laptop the only sound. Daniel sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clutching his head, trying to organize the whirlwind inside. Memories of their time together flickered before him. The laughter, the intimate evenings, her smiles. And yet, each memory was now tinged with doubt, suspicion gnawing at the edges. Could he have known? Should he have known? He began retracing every conversation, every glance, every touch. Late-night calls that he once dismissed as work, moments when she seemed distant or nervous, all now held a new, sinister meaning. His mind became a cage of obsession. He started documenting, scribbling notes in a small leather notebook, times, dates, perceived inconsistencies. Each line fueled a growing need for control, for understanding, for certainty in a world that had suddenly become uncertain. Laura emerged from the bedroom, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Daniel, you should rest, she said softly, offering the steaming cup. Her hands trembled slightly. He noticed immediately. But instead of relief, it ignited his suspicion. Why the tremor? Was it fear or guilt? "I can't rest," he muttered, voice low and tight. "I can't stop thinking about everything. About you." His eyes, wide and searching, locked onto hers. "Why didn't you tell me? Why hide this?" Laura placed a hand over his, trying to soothe him. "Daniel, please. It wasn't easy for me. I wanted to tell you, but I was terrified. I didn't want to lose you." Her words, though sincere, seemed to pour fuel on the fire already raging in his mind. Daniel recoiled slightly, not in anger, but in the uncontrollable need to unravel the truth. He began checking her phone subtly, noting messages she sent and received. He watched her interactions with friends and colleagues with a quiet intensity, parsing tone, pauses, gestures, all under the lens of suspicion. Every action, every hesitation, became evidence in his mind, confirming the gnawing fear that nothing was as it seemed. The nights grew longer, his sleep fractured by visions of Laura, flashes of anger, betrayal, and desire colliding in chaotic waves. He found himself imagining confrontations, questions, accusations, and sometimes darker scenarios. Scenarios he quickly dismissed as thoughts but could not entirely banish. Each day, the obsession grew stronger, infecting his interactions, his work, even his dreams. Laura sensed the shift. Her gentle smiles became cautious, tentative, as though walking a fragile line between honesty and self-preservation. "Daniel, please. You have to stop torturing yourself," she whispered one evening, her voice cracking under the strain. "I can't," he admitted, voice hollow. "I need to understand everything. Every secret. Every lie." He stared at her, a mixture of longing and fear etching his features. "I need to know who you really are." She recoiled slightly, and in that instant, Daniel realized that the woman he loved was becoming a stranger to him, someone simultaneously familiar and unknowable. The obsession had become a shadow, following him relentlessly, whispering questions he did not want to hear, compelling him to see her life under a microscope, dissecting every nuance, searching for a truth that was always just out of reach. And so the days bled into nights, each encounter, each glance, each quiet word thick with tension. The perfect marriage had become a war zone of suspicion and fear, and Daniel was slowly losing himself to the darkness growing inside. The storm was only beginning. The following morning, Daniel's obsession had not waned. If anything, it had sharpened, slicing through every mundane moment with an invisible blade. The apartment was heavy with silence, each tick of the clock a reminder of the revelation that had unraveled his world. Laura moved cautiously, sensing the tension that had begun to define their interactions. Every glance, every gesture became charged with meaning, interpreted through a lens of suspicion and fear. Daniel's phone buzzed. It was his co-worker, Andrew, asking to meet for lunch. Daniel hesitated, then accepted, needing a distraction from the relentless spirals in his mind. The restaurant was crowded, smells of grilled meat and coffee mingling, but Daniel barely noticed. Instead, he focused on Andrew's easy demeanor, the casual jokes that now felt distant and superficial. "Everything okay?" Andrew asked, leaning back, concern knitting his brow. "You seem off." Daniel stared into his coffee cup, the liquid reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. "It's complicated," he muttered. Things aren't what they seem at home." Andrew frowned, leaning in. "You mean Laura?" Daniel's hands clenched around his cup. "Yes, there are things I've discovered, things that change everything." Andrew's eyes narrowed, a flicker of judgment crossing his face. "Well, people have secrets. But maybe it's not as bad as you think. You've been together a long time. Maybe there's a reason she kept it from you." Daniel shook his head, frustration coiling tighter inside him. "You don't understand. This isn't just a secret. This changes her. Changes us. Changes everything I thought I knew." Andrew sighed, a quiet tension threading his words. "Look, man, just be careful. People talk, and sometimes the whispers can make a small thing seem like a mountain. But it doesn't mean you're right to overreact." The conversation lingered in Daniel's mind even after he returned home. Whispers, murmurs, judgment. He imagined them everywhere. In the office, on the street, in the neighbors' half-glances. Even Laura's friends, he began to suspect, were complicit in hiding the truth. Every interaction became a subtle test, a potential betrayal to be catalogued in his obsessive mind. Laura noticed a change in his behavior immediately. One evening, as she set down dinner, Daniel barely touched his food, staring at her across the table. "Who have you been talking to?" he asked suddenly, voice low and taut. Laura froze, fork halfway to her mouth. What do you mean?" "Your friends. Your co-workers. Everyone," he said, eyes narrowing. "Are they keeping things from me? Whispering, talking about you behind my back?" Her hand shook slightly, and she swallowed. "Daniel, no. I promise. They don't. Don't lie to me," he snapped, voice sharp. The sound startled even him. His pulse raced, adrenaline prickling through his veins. Laura flinched, retreating into herself, her soft voice trembling. "I would never betray you. Please calm down." But calmness was a stranger to Daniel now. Every whisper, every glance, every hesitant word became proof that the world was conspiring against him. The marriage that had once felt solid was now a web of suspicion, delicate threads stretched to the breaking point. He began to document again. Notes on conversations, behavior patterns, imagined alliances forming behind his back. The obsession fed itself, growing more invasive, more consuming. Even small gestures of Laura's, touching her hair, checking her phone, became evidence of deceit. Outside, the neighbors moved about their lives, oblivious to the storm brewing behind the apartment windows. Yet to Daniel, every figure, every movement seemed charged with intention, a silent witness to the betrayal he imagined at every turn. And Laura, though desperate to reassure him, began to feel the pressure mounting. Fear seeped into her words, hesitation into her movements. The gentle, trusting woman he had married was slowly retreating, shrinking under the weight of suspicion that now dominated every shared space. By the end of the day, Daniel was exhausted yet wired, the obsessive cycle consuming him from within. Whispers of betrayal had become the foundation of his thoughts, the lens through which he viewed everything, and no one, not even Laura, was safe from its scrutiny. The perfect marriage had long since fractured, and as night fell, Daniel realized the escalation was inevitable. The quiet tension between them had transformed into a dangerous storm, one that could not be contained. The tension in the apartment had become almost unbearable. Daniel moved through the rooms with a quiet intensity, his eyes constantly scanning, searching for signs of deception. Every misplaced object, every delayed response from Laura, now felt like confirmation of some imagined betrayal. He no longer saw the woman he had married. He saw a stranger wearing her face, hiding secrets he could no longer ignore. Laura sensed the shift immediately. She tiptoed around him, her voice soft and cautious. "Daniel, can we just sit tonight? Talk calmly." Daniel turned sharply, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. "Talk calmly?" "Calmly," he spat, pacing the living room, hands clenching into fists. "Do you think I can be calm after what I know? After everything?" Laura shrank back, trying to maintain composure. "I've told you the truth. I've never lied about who I am." He laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet apartment. "Truth? You call hiding your entire past the truth? Do you have any idea what you've done to me, to us?" His voice rose, trembling with the intensity of his obsession. For the first time, his anger manifested physically. He slammed his hand against the kitchen counter, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small space. Laura flinched, her heart racing as she pressed her back against the wall. "Daniel, please don't." But Daniel could not stop. The obsession had shifted into aggression, a dangerous combination fueled by fear, betrayal, and a mind unraveling under its own weight. He stepped closer, eyes dark and searching. "You're hiding something. I can feel it. Every move you make, every glance." Laura held up her hands defensively. "I swear, Daniel, I'm not hiding anything. I've told you everything I can. You have to trust me." Her voice shook, but there was a resolute undertone, a survival instinct kicking in. Daniel's breathing grew heavier. He reached toward her, and for a moment, his hand trembled as if he might strike. But he stopped, caught in a sudden, terrifying self-awareness. His chest heaved, adrenaline coursing through his veins. I can't. I can't just sit here and do nothing," he muttered, almost to himself. The room felt smaller, oppressive, as though the walls themselves had tightened around them. The flickering light from the single lamp cast long shadows across Daniel's face, emphasizing the strain etched into his features. Laura pressed herself into the corner, trying to appear smaller, invisible, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her. "I don't want to hurt you, Daniel," she said softly, but firm enough to hold his gaze. "You need to stop before this goes too far, before something terrible happens." Daniel froze for a moment, the words sinking in, grounding him slightly. But the seed of aggression had been planted, and he knew that tonight, the balance between control and chaos had been crossed. He stepped back, shaking his head, muttering fragments of thoughts he could not articulate. As the evening wore on, Daniel retreated into obsessive contemplation. He checked the apartment obsessively, opening drawers, reviewing Laura's personal effects, not with curiosity, but with a desperate need to control the unknown. Laura silently documented the escalating behavior in her phone, notes for herself in case the worst happened. Outside, the night was quiet, the hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog filling the empty streets. Inside, however, the apartment had become a battlefield of unspoken threats, psychological tension, and fragile trust on the edge of collapse. By the end of the night, neither spoke much. Daniel sat staring blankly at the walls, mind spinning with imagined betrayals, while Laura sat nearby, trembling, knowing that this first real threat, was only the beginning. The fragile barrier that had kept violence at bay had cracked, and the darkness that had been simmering beneath their relationship was now poised to erupt. In the quiet that followed, both understood that nothing would ever be the same. The obsession had taken root, and the first threat had proven that fear and rage could no longer be contained. The next move, whichever direction it would go, would set the stage for consequences neither could escape. The apartment felt colder than usual, the shadows in the corners deeper, stretching like fingers across the walls. Laura sat on the edge of the sofa, her laptop balanced on her knees, scrolling through old journals and documents. Each word, each memory, was a lifeline, a reminder of the life she had lived before Daniel, a life filled with fear, secrecy, and survival. The past she had buried carefully was now dangling in front of her like a blade, waiting to fall. Daniel remained in the kitchen, quietly observing, a restless shadow in his own home. He was consumed by thoughts of betrayal, revisiting the revelation from the gynecologist's office again and again. His mind played through scenarios, whispers, and imagined secrets, each one more damning than the last. The obsession was now inseparable from his daily existence, an insidious lens through which he viewed everything. Laura's voice was soft, almost a whisper to herself. "I had to hide because no one would understand. I had to survive." Her fingers paused over the keyboard as a memory surfaced. The first time she had been confronted for who she truly was, the shame and fear that had threatened to consume her. She had learned early that secrecy was a shield, but it came with a cost: loneliness, isolation, and the constant anxiety that someone she loved would discover the truth. Daniel's footsteps approached, tentative yet deliberate. "Laura, what are you looking at?" His voice was quieter now, curiosity mingled with tension, the obsessive edge still present. Laura closed the laptop slowly, locking eyes with him. "Just my past. Things I need to remember. Things that explain why I am the way I am." He tilted his head, narrowing his eyes. "You mean all the secrets you've kept? All the lies?" His words were sharp, accusing, though the tremor in his voice betrayed a deeper fear. Laura exhaled, trying to steady herself. "Not lies, Daniel. Survival. Protection. I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted us to be safe, together. That's why I couldn't tell you everything at once." Daniel shook his head, pacing again, hands running through his hair. "Safe? Do you think keeping secrets makes anything safe? Every day, I wonder what else you're hiding. Every conversation, every glance, how am I supposed to trust you?" Her eyes glistened, the vulnerability she tried to hide now visible. "I thought I could trust you to see me for who I really am, to love me despite everything. But now everything is broken. I don't know how to fix it. He paused, the weight of his obsession pressing down like a physical force. The apartment seemed to contract, trapping them in a web of suspicion, fear, and misunderstanding. Daniel's mind raced, replaying old events through a distorted lens. The laughter that now seemed mocking, the moments of tenderness that now felt performative. Every memory was a riddle, every interaction a potential lie. Laura's fingers brushed against his hand briefly, a silent plea for understanding, but Daniel recoiled instinctively, eyes darting toward the door as if expecting a threat from the outside world to materialize. "I don't know who you are anymore," he muttered, voice hollow, heavy with despair. Laura sank back, feeling the distance between them widen like a chasm. "I'm still me," she said, almost to herself. "Still the woman you married. Still the woman who loves you. But the world, our world, is too fragile for the truth to exist without pain." The shadows grew longer as night approached, stretching across the apartment and highlighting the emotional fissures forming between them. Daniel's obsession had become a silent predator, stalking every thought, every memory, every heartbeat. And Laura, though brave and resilient, felt the weight of her own history pressing down, threatening to crush her under the tension of a marriage now haunted by secrets and lies. By the end of the evening, neither spoke much. The apartment was quiet, yet the air was thick with unspoken fears and unshed tears. Each knew that the fragile balance between past and present, truth and deception, had been disturbed. The next confrontation, the next revelation, would not be gentle. It would force them both to face the consequences of their hidden lives. The air in the apartment was thick, stifling, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel sat on the edge of the sofa, eyes wide, muscles taut, staring at Laura as she moved about the room with careful deliberation. Every gesture she made, no matter how small, now felt loaded with suspicion. The obsession that had been simmering quietly for weeks had reached a fever pitch, and neither of them could ignore the tension anymore. Laura's hand shook slightly as she set down a stack of dishes from dinner, her eyes flicking nervously toward him. "Daniel, please," she whispered, voice soft, almost pleading. "You're scaring me." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. "Do I scare you? Or is it the truth that terrifies you?" His voice trembled with rage and desperation, each word heavy with accusation. "I've been patient, Laura. I've tried to understand. But every lie, every secret, every hesitation." His hand shot out, gripping the back of a chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "It's too much. I can't take it anymore." Laura froze, a chill running down her spine. "Daniel, you're hurting yourself with this obsession. Please step back." But Daniel could not. The obsession had mutated into something darker, something he could no longer contain. He rose abruptly, the chair clattering to the floor behind him. "Step back," he shouted. "You've been hiding from me your whole life. Every word, every touch, every smile, was it all fake?" Laura's heart pounded. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to shrink, to disappear, but it was no use. "No, I've told you everything I could. I've trusted you." His eyes blazed, reflecting the flickering light of the lamp. "Trusted me? Do you even understand what that means? Do you understand what it feels like to discover everything you believed was a lie?" His voice cracked, a raw mixture of grief and anger. "I feel betrayed. By you. By us. By everything." The apartment seemed to close in on them, shadows stretching long and dark across the walls, distorted by the flickering lamp. The tension was a living thing, coiling around their throats, pressing down on their chests. Daniel advanced, his hands shaking, not with fear, but with the intensity of emotions he could not name. Laura's voice was small but resolute. "Daniel, you're scaring me. Please. We need to stop before someone gets hurt." But the words barely registered. Daniel's mind was a storm, every thought and memory filtered through a lens of obsession and rage. He grabbed her arm impulsively, the sudden contact sending a jolt of terror through her body. "You can't hide from me anymore," he whispered, voice low but threatening. "I need to know everything. Every secret, every lie. I can't live like this, not another day." Laura pulled back, tears brimming in her eyes. "Daniel, please, you don't have to do this. I've loved you. I always have. But you have to stop." The room was silent for a heartbeat, the only sound the rapid ticking of the clock on the wall. Daniel's chest heaved as he tried to steady his breathing, caught between fury and confusion. The realization hit him with terrifying clarity. The fragile veneer of their relationship had shattered, and there was no turning back. The line between love and obsession had blurred, and they were both teetering on the edge of something irreversible. Daniel dropped his hand slowly, his shoulders slumping, but the tension remained, coiled and dangerous. Laura's gaze met his, pleading, searching for the man she loved beneath the storm consuming him. Neither spoke, both understanding that the next moment would define everything. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, silent and indifferent. Inside, two lives balanced on the brink, every heartbeat echoing with unspoken threats and unshed tears. The breaking point had arrived. The next choice, the next movement, would set the stage for consequences neither could escape, and would lead them both into the darkness awaiting in the gynecologist's office, where truth and violence were poised to collide. The waiting room of the gynecologist's office was quiet, sterile, and impossibly bright. Daniel's hands clenched into fists in his lap as he followed Laura through the sliding doors, every step echoing like a drumbeat in his chest. The familiar scent of antiseptic and paper gowns now seemed suffocating, tainted by the anxiety and rage simmering beneath his carefully restrained exterior. Laura's fingers trembled as she held his arm lightly. Her touch meant to reassure, but Daniel barely noticed. His mind was a hurricane of obsession, betrayal, and confusion, every memory replaying with distorted intensity. The past weeks of doubt and paranoia had reached a crescendo. Tonight, he could no longer separate love from rage, truth from deception. The doctor emerged from the examination room, clipboard in hand, smiling politely. "Good to see you again, Laura. And you must be Daniel." He extended a hand, unaware of the storm contained within the man before him. Daniel's eyes flicked toward Laura, who offered a weak smile. "Yes," she murmured. "He's here." They moved into the office, the clinical white walls closing in. Laura perched nervously on the edge of the examination chair, while Daniel lingered near the door, his eyes darting around, noting every detail, every object. He felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread, a magnetic pull toward confrontation, toward discovering the limits of their fragile reality. The doctor cleared his throat. "So, Laura, we're here for a routine follow-up today. Everything seems stable from your last visit, but I'd like to review some things with both of you." Daniel's chest tightened. "Review what?" His voice was low, almost a growl, carrying an edge that made Laura flinch. The doctor glanced at him, unease flickering in his eyes. "Just medical history, Laura's records, and any questions you might have." Daniel's gaze fixed on Laura. "Records? Questions?" His tone was sharp, accusatory. "Or are there more secrets?" Laura's lips trembled. "Daniel, please. Not here. Not now." But his mind would not be still. Months of obsession, doubt, and fear had built a pressure too strong to contain. He stepped closer, voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "No. I need to know. Everything. Right now." Laura's eyes widened, a flash of terror crossing her face. "Daniel, please." The doctor sensed the escalating tension. "Sir, please calm down. There's no reason for." Daniel snapped. Rage and fear collided violently, a force he could no longer suppress. His hand shot out, gripping Laura's shoulders tightly. "You can't hide from me anymore. Not here. Not ever." His words were raw, desperate, trembling with emotion. Laura struggled, trying to pull away, her chair scraping against the floor. "Daniel, stop. Please." The room became chaos in an instant. Papers fluttered to the floor. Medical instruments rattled in their trays, and the stark white walls seemed to close in around them. Daniel's mind was a storm, vision narrowing to a single point. The betrayal he believed had defined his marriage. Every scream, every struggle, every heartbeat echoed in his ears like a drum signaling war. The doctor moved instinctively, stepping forward to intervene. "Daniel, let go." But Daniel's control had fractured. In a moment that would be seared into both their memories forever, his desperation erupted into violence. Hands, eyes, and rage collided, and the office, once a neutral, safe space, became a scene of blood, panic, and irreversible action. Laura's cry pierced the room, echoing off the sterile walls, mingling with Daniel's panicked shouts. The doctor lunged to protect her, but the physical confrontation was swift, chaotic, and brutal. By the time it was over, the sterile office smelled of fear, antiseptic, and the metallic tang of blood. Daniel stood trembling, chest heaving, staring at what he had done. Laura lay on the floor, eyes wide with shock and terror. The doctor knelt beside her, hands trembling as he tried to stem the panic. Phone pressed to his ear, dialing emergency services. In that moment, everything changed. The obsession, the secrets, the lies, they had culminated here, in a small, bright office that would now be defined by blood and horror. Daniel understood, with a clarity both terrifying and surreal, that there was no turning back. The world he had known, the perfect marriage, the love, the trust, had ended. And as the sirens began to wail in the distance, drawing closer, the aftermath of a single, irreversible act hung heavily in the air. The consequences of obsession and betrayal had arrived, leaving nothing untouched, and no one unscathed. The wail of sirens had faded into the distance, leaving the apartment in a hollow, oppressive quiet. Daniel sat slumped on the edge of the sofa, hands trembling, eyes wide and unfocused. The adrenaline that had fueled his rage now drained from his body, replaced by a numbing emptiness. He stared at the remnants of the confrontation, the overturned furniture, scattered papers, and the lingering scent of blood and fear, and could barely comprehend how everything had unraveled in such a short span of time. Laura lay on the floor, pale and trembling, her hands clutching her side where bruises had formed. The paramedics' gentle but firm voices guided her through the shock, stabilizing her as they prepared her for transport. Daniel tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat, a tangle of guilt, fear, and obsessive confusion. I didn't mean, he whispered, voice cracking. The sentence ended in a shuddering silence. The doctor, still kneeling beside Laura, looked at Daniel with a mixture of horror and exhaustion. Sir, you have to stop. She's hurt, and this is serious. His voice was steady but tight, reflecting the fear that had settled like a stone in his chest. Daniel nodded weakly, sinking lower onto the sofa, hands pressed against his face. The realization that his obsession had crossed an irreversible boundary was now unavoidable. Every thought, every doubt, every paranoia that had consumed him for weeks had led to this single moment, a moment of violence, a moment that would haunt him forever. As the paramedics wheeled Laura out, her eyes met his briefly. No words were exchanged, only a look of fear, confusion, and the faintest trace of sorrow. Daniel felt an unexpected surge of grief, a desperate longing to undo what had been done, to rewind time and erase the chaos he had unleashed. But he knew, deep down, that nothing could reverse the damage. Hours later, the apartment was silent, too silent, as if the building itself mourned the events that had unfolded. The police had arrived, taking statements, photographing the scene, documenting every detail. Daniel answered their questions mechanically, voice flat, mind numbly cataloging the facts, while ignoring the emotional weight pressing down on him. Each response felt hollow, each gesture meaningless, yet he knew that his actions would have consequences far beyond the sterile walls of his apartment. Detectives spoke in careful tones, asking about the history, about possible motives, about the relationship that had become a crucible for obsession and mistrust. Daniel's responses were honest in their surface simplicity, but failed to convey the storm that had raged inside him for months. He had been consumed, driven by suspicion, fear, and a desperate need for control, and now the fallout was his to bear. News crews swarmed the building the next day, flashing cameras and frantic questions, creating an almost surreal cacophony. The headline would read, "Domestic obsession leads to violence in gynecologist's office." Daniel could barely process the irony of the words. His life, his love, his marriage, all reduced to a public story of fear, betrayal, and tragedy. Friends and family reached out, some in horror, some in disbelief. Daniel could not explain the obsession, the psychological unraveling, the depth of paranoia that had driven him to violence. He knew that even if he tried, the world would never fully understand the combination of love, fear, and secrecy that had consumed him. In the quiet that followed, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, replaying every interaction, every whispered suspicion, every imagined betrayal. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the storm that had erupted weeks before. Every memory of Laura, every touch, every word of love now carried a shadow of guilt, of fear, of the irreversible choices he had made. And yet, in that silence, he began to understand the cost of obsession, the fragility of trust, and the danger of secrets kept too long. The aftermath was not only physical but psychological, a haunting that would follow him long after the blood had been cleaned, long after the paramedics had left, long after the world had moved on. Daniel closed his eyes, breathing shallowly, the apartment heavy with memories and regrets. He knew the story was over in one sense, yet the consequences would never truly end. The silence that enveloped him now was deafening, a permanent reminder that obsession, fear, and hidden truths had destroyed everything he had once held dear. In that quiet, Daniel realized that some actions could never be undone, some truths could never be reclaimed, and some lives, once fractured by obsession and betrayal, could never return to what they had been. The aftermath of silence was final, inescapable, and eternal.